All right, let's talk about a period that completely flipped the world on its head, the Industrial Revolution. This was a 150-year whirlwind that literally dragged humanity from the farm to the factory, changing everything: how we work, where we live, even what we wear. So, what were the key ingredients that kicked off this massive global transformation? Let's dive in. To really get how radical this era was, this quote from Adam Smith in 1776 is the perfect place to start. He's talking about making a simple pin. Now, before all this, one single craftsman would have made the whole thing, start to finish. But what Smith is describing here is a totally new system, 18 different people, each doing one tiny specialized task. This wasn't just a new way to make pins, it was the blueprint for an entirely new world.
And that new world has a name: the Industrial Revolution. It's the huge idea Adam Smith was hinting at, a massive shift away from individual artisans to production by machines. But this wasn't just about swapping a person for a machine. It was about redesigning society itself around that machine.
Okay, but to really feel the shock of the factory, we have to understand the world it replaced. So, picture this. It's the early 18th century, and Britain is a world sewn by hand. Life is almost entirely rural. Most families are growing their own food and making their own clothes. The rhythm of your day isn't dictated by a clock, but by the sun and the season.
Back then, the main way cloth was made was through the cottage industry. A merchant would drop off raw cotton at a family's cottage, and the women would spin it into cloth, right there in their own homes. They'd fit it in between taking care of the kids and doing farm chores. Now, the work was slow and the pay wasn't great, but it came with something really important: a little bit of freedom and control over your own time.
And this really shows you the fundamental trade-off that was happening. On one side, you've got the cottage. It's slow, it's individual work, but it's done on your own terms. On the other side, the factory. It's way faster, super efficient, and all under one roof. That huge gain in productivity? Well, it came at a cost. Workers basically traded their independence for a wage, and their homes for the factory floor. That was the central bargain of this new industrial age.
But here's the thing: an industrial revolution can't just happen out of nowhere. Before you can even think about having factory workers, you've got to figure out how to feed them. So the first revolution didn't actually happen in a city, it happened out on the farm. All of a sudden, in the 1700s, farming gets this major upgrade. You've got new scientific methods like crop rotation to keep the soil healthy, and cool inventions like the seed drill to plant more effectively. You're getting way more food per acre. And then there was the potato. This import from the Americas was an absolute game changer. It was cheap, packed with calories, and super easy to grow. It was the perfect fuel for a population boom. And this is the key insight, the domino effect that made everything else possible. It's laid out perfectly here. Step 1, new farming tech. That leads to step 2, way more food, which leads to step 3, a population explosion. And that brings us to the final crucial step, a huge new workforce, no longer tied to the farm and ready to flood into the cities.
So now you've got a growing workforce and a rising demand for goods, especially cotton cloth. The pressure was on. Investors wanted things made way faster than the old cottage industry could manage. The stage was set for a technological explosion.
And boy, did it explode. First, in the 1760s, you get the spinning jenny, which lets one worker spin multiple threads at once. That's a huge leap in efficiency. But then, Richard Arkwright's water frame uses the power of rivers to automate the whole process. The only problem? These new machines were massive and expensive. You couldn't just pop one in your living room. And just like that, the cottage industry was finished. The factory was born.
And this is exactly why Richard Arkwright is often called the father of the factory. See, he wasn't just an inventor, he was a systems builder. He was the one who realized that to make these new machines profitable, you had to bring the workers to the machine. You had to control the entire process, the hours, the pace, the labor, all of it, under one roof.
Now, the next big piece of the puzzle actually came from an American, Eli Whitney. He was working on making firearms, and he came up with this revolutionary idea: interchangeable parts. Before Whitney, every single part of a gun was unique, totally handcrafted. If a trigger broke, a specialist had to custom make a new one. But Whitney's system meant you could just mass-produce identical triggers. Break one? No problem, just swap it out for a new one. This was a total game changer for manufacturing.
And the implications of this were just huge. Interchangeable parts didn't just change machines, they completely changed the workforce. You didn't need a master craftsman anymore to build a rifle from start to finish. Nope, you could break the job down into simple, repeatable steps. This division of labor meant you could hire unskilled workers, train them in just a few minutes to do one small task over and over again, paving the way for the modern assembly line. Okay, so we've got the agricultural base, we've got the technology, and we've got a new way of organizing work. But why did all of this ignite in Britain first? Well, it turns out Britain had this unique combination of advantages, a perfect storm of conditions just right for an industrial revolution.
A huge piece of the answer was just pure geographic luck. I mean, look at this map. Britain was basically sitting on a giant lump of coal. It had massive, easily accessible deposits of the black rock that would fuel the whole revolution. And, just as importantly, those coal fields were right next to rivers and ports, creating a natural highway system to move resources and products around.
But it wasn't just the coal. Britain had the whole recipe. It had the rivers for power and transport, it had vast amounts of capital, a lot of it generated through its colonial empire and the profits of the slave trade, all ready to be invested. It had the world's most dominant navy to protect its trade routes, and critically, it had a stable government and a legal system that protected private property, which gave people the confidence to take big financial risks. So you take all these forces, the changes in farming, the new technology, and Britain's unique advantages, and they unleash one of the greatest social shifts in human history, a mass migration of people from the countryside into these new, rapidly growing cities.
So what was pushing people off the land? A key driver was something called the enclosure movement. For centuries, rural villagers had access to common lands where they could graze their animals or grow a little food. But then, the government started fencing these lands off for private commercial farming. This created a huge class of landless farmers with nowhere to go and no way to feed their families, essentially forcing them toward the new factories in cities like Manchester and Liverpool.
And the result of this mass migration was just staggering. Just look at these numbers for Manchester. In 1801, its population was around 300,000. A century later, it had exploded to over 2.3 million people. That's not just growth, that's a complete remaking of a city in just a few generations.
Let's just put that in perspective for a second. A 7-fold increase. The population of Manchester multiplied by 7 in a single century. This was an urban explosion, creating an entirely new kind of city, one that wasn't designed for people, but for industry.
So that's the final piece of the puzzle right there. This demographic tidal wave, pushed off the farms and pulled toward the cities, provided the last essential ingredient for the revolution, a massive, concentrated workforce, desperate and ready for jobs powering the new machines.
So, in just a few generations, Britain and then the world was transformed. New ways of farming, new technologies, new ways of working. It all created unprecedented wealth and power. But as millions of people flooded into these new industrial cities, it raises a really critical question. What was the human cost of all this progress? That, though, is a story for another time.